exams are a universally stressful experience, often looming over students like dark clouds. The pressure to perform well can be overwhelming, leading to sleepless nights and heightened anxiety. The following stories delve into the dark side of academic stress, exploring how the fear of failure can manifest in terrifying ways. Story 1. The Pact with Darkness. Jackson was a high school senior in Thailand, anxiously awaiting his TGAT exam results. He lived with his parents in a small, cramped apartment on the outskirts of Bangkok. His father, Mr. Samshai, worked tirelessly as a janitor at a local school, while his mother, Mrs. Neri, eked out a meager income selling kanji in the bustling morning market. The modest earnings barely covered their basic needs, let alone Jackson's dream of attending medical school. As the only child, Jackson understood the weight of his family's hopes and dreams rested squarely on his shoulders. His father, nearing retirement age, often came home exhausted, his hands calloused from years of manual labor. Mrs. Neri, a resilient woman with warm eyes and a perpetual smile, worked from dawn till noon, dishing out steaming bowls of kanji to weary market-goers. Despite their hardships, they always encouraged Jackson to pursue his dreams, hoping he would one day live comfortably out of poverty. Jackson's desperation to succeed intensified as the TGAT exam results day loomed closer. Sleep became elusive, and the constant worry gnawed at his sanity. One restless night, while scrolling through his phone in search of solution, Jackson stumbled upon articles about black magic. They spoke of rituals and dark entities that could grant wishes in exchange for a price. Driven by despair and a sense of duty to his family, Jackson decided to explore this forbidden path. The next day, he ventured into a notorious part of town known for its association with occult practices. The narrow streets were littered with remnants of yesterday's life, and the air was thick with the scent of incense and fried food. Stray dogs prowled the alleys, their eyes gleaming in the dim streetlights. After navigating through a labyrinth of dilapidated buildings and graffiti-covered walls, Jackson arrived at an old, crumbling structure adorned with faded symbols and strange markings. For summoning his courage, Jackson pushed open the creaky door and stepped into a dimly lit room. The air inside was heavy with the scent of must and decay. Shelves lined with dusty jars of pickled animal parts and strange talismans loomed in the shadows. At the far end of the room, seated in a rickety chair, was an elderly woman. Her face was weathered and wrinkled, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity as she gnawed on a raw chicken leg, blood dripping down her chin. Jackson's heart raced, but he swallowed his fear and approached her. "Excuse me," he began tentatively. I need help." The old woman's gaze fixed on him, and a crooked smile spread across her face. "Help, you say? What does a boy like you seek in the realm of shadows?" Jackson hesitated, then blurted out, I need to pass my exams. I need a high mark to get into medical school to receive a scholarship. My family's future depends on it." A low, raspy chuckle escaped the old woman's lips, sending a chill down Jackson's spine. "Ah, the weight of expectations," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know a way, but it comes with a price. I'll pay it," Jackson declared, his voice tinged with desperation. The old woman's eyes narrowed, assessing him with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Very well. There is an ancient spirit that can grant you success, but you must feed her. For 10 nights at the stroke of midnight, you must offer her chicken blood. Fail to do so, and you will invoke her wrath." Jackson's breath caught in his throat, but he nodded fervently. "I understand. I will do it." The old woman handed him a tattered piece of parchment inscribed with archaic symbols and a chant. "Recite this," she instructed, her voice a haunting whisper. "And remember, do not anger her." Jackson left the eerie building, clutching the parchment tightly. His mind raced with doubts and fears, but his determination to secure his family's future drove him forward. He knew he had to perform the ritual without his parents' knowledge. Jackson knew his next step was to acquire the chicken blood. His heart pounded as he made his way to the bustling market where his mother sold her congee. The market was a vibrant, noisy place, filled with the sounds of vendors shouting their prices and customers haggling over fresh produce and meats. The air was thick with the scents of spices, cooking food, and raw meat. He weaved through the throng of people, his eyes scanning the various stalls until he spotted the butcher's shop. The butcher was a burly man with a sweat-stained apron and a cleaver that gleamed under the harsh market lights. His hands were stained with blood as he expertly chopped and prepared various cuts of meat for his customers. The sight of the blood made Jackson's stomach churn, but he steeled himself and approached the stall. The butcher looked at Jackson with a raised eyebrow, wiping his hands on his apron. Jackson could feel the butcher's eyes boring into him, scrutinizing him, taking a deep breath. Jackson explained his unusual request. The butcher's expression turned from one of mild curiosity to suspicion, and then to reluctant acceptance. With a grunt, the butcher turned and disappeared into the back of his stall. Jackson waited, his nerves on edge, as he listened to the sounds of chopping and the occasional clatter of metal. After what felt like an eternity, the butcher returned, holding a small glass bottle filled with dark, thick liquid. The sight of the bottle sent a shiver down Jackson's spine. He could almost feel the weight of the old woman's words and the gravity of the ritual he was about to perform. The butcher handed over the bottle with a wary glance, and Jackson quickly tucked it into his bag. He could feel the warmth of the blood through the fabric, a constant, unsettling reminder of the lengths he was willing to go to for his family's future. As he left the market, the lively atmosphere seemed to close in around him, amplifying his sense of unease. The cacophony of the market faded into the background as his thoughts became consumed by the impending ritual and the dark path he had chosen. Jackson hurried home, the bottle of chicken blood feeling like a heavy, ominous weight in his bag. That night, with his parents asleep and the apartment shrouded in darkness, he climbed to the top floor of their building. The city lights below twinkled innocently, oblivious to the dark act about to be performed above. Jackson carefully poured the blood into a plastic container, reciting the incantation the old woman had given him. As the thick liquid pooled, he felt a sense of dread settle over him. He left the container on the rooftop, hoping that this macabre offering would be enough to secure his future. For 9 consecutive nights, Jackson repeated the ritual. Each time, the eerie sensation of being watched grew stronger. On the 3rd night, he heard whispers in the wind, faint yet unsettling. By the 6th night, shadows seemed to dance around him, their movements unnaturally fluid. The 7th night brought a cold breeze that seemed to carry whispers of his name, chilling him to the bone. Despite the mounting fear, Jackson pressed on. On the 10th day, his exam results were released. To his immense relief and joy, Jackson had scored exceptionally high marks, securing his place in medical school and a scholarship. His parents' faces lit up with pride and happiness, and they celebrated his success with a grand feast shared with friends and neighbors. Amid the laughter and jubilation, Jackson lost track of time. Reaching home late at night, it was only when a chill wind blew through his room that he remembered the final night of the ritual. Glancing at the clock, he realized it was past midnight. Tired and feeling happy over his marks, he had dismissed the ritual as mere superstition. Now that he had achieved his goal, he decided to sleep, assured of his success. In the dead of night, Jackson was awakened by a sound. The slow, deliberate creak of his window opening. A cold draft swept through the room, raising goosebumps on his skin. He turned to close the window, but as he did, his blood ran cold. Standing at the foot of his bed was a figure cloaked in darkness. Its form was twisted and grotesque, with long, gnarled limbs and hollow eyes that seemed to devour the light. A chilling grin split its gaunt face, revealing rows of jagged, blood-stained teeth. Jackson's heart hammered in his chest as he recoiled in terror. He tried to scream, but fear rendered him speechless. The figure advanced slowly, its movements unnaturally fluid, like a shadow come to life. With each step, the air grew colder, and the room filled with the sickening stench of decay. Desperate, Jackson reached for his phone, but before he could dial for help, darkness closed in, and he saw those empty, soulless eyes staring into his own. The next morning, Jackson's parents awoke to find his room empty. Frantic with worry, they searched every corner of the building, calling out his name in desperation. Finally, in a remote corner of the rooftop, they found his lifeless body, sprawled in a pool of blood. His abdomen was grotesquely mutilated, his intestines arranged in a macabre display beside him. The makeshift container, now stained crimson, lay beside his lifeless form. Mrs. Nuri collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face, as Mr. Somchai held her in his trembling arms. Jackson's tragic demise served as a haunting reminder of the perilous allure of dark magic and the high price paid for desperate wishes. His family mourned his loss, haunted by the unanswered questions and the chilling memory of that fateful night. Story 2. Maribel Library. In a small, picturesque town nestled in the French countryside stood the prestigious University of Maribel. The town itself was charming, with cobblestone streets, quaint cafes, and centuries-old buildings that exuded a serene yet mysterious aura. Among these buildings was the University Library, an ancient, Gothic structure that had stood for over 200 years. It was in this hallowed hall of learning that Talia, a first-year medical student, found herself spending countless hours as exam season approached. Talia had always dreamed of becoming a doctor. She had worked tirelessly to secure a place at the University of Maribel, and now that she was there, she was determined to excel. However, the pressure was immense, and Talia felt it pressing down on her more and more each day. The looming exams filled her with dread, and the fear of failure haunted her every waking moment. The library, with its vast collection of medical texts and peaceful ambience, became her sanctuary. But as exam season intensified, Talia's stress levels skyrocketed. She often found herself studying until the early hours of the morning, fueled by coffee and sheer willpower. Her dreams were plagued with images of failing grades and disappointed faces, and the weight of her own expectations seemed almost unbearable. She felt isolated, trapped in a cycle of endless studying and mounting anxiety. During exam seasons, the library remained open 24 hours a day to accommodate the intense study schedules of its students. It was not uncommon to see clusters of students poring over their books late into the night. However, few dared to stay past midnight. There were whispers and rumors about the library being haunted by the spirit of a student who had committed suicide years ago. Stories circulated of eerie sightings and strange occurrences that sent shivers down the spines of those who lingered too late. Unfamiliar with these tales, Talia focused solely on her studies, one particularly demanding night. As the hours slipped by unnoticed, Talia found herself alone in the library. Her classmates had gradually drifted away, seeking the comfort of their beds. But Talia, engrossed in her textbooks and notes, didn't realize how late it had become until she glanced at the clock and saw it was almost 2 a.m. Unperturbed, she decided to continue studying. The library was silent except for the faint rustling of pages and the occasional creak of the old building settling. Talia's eyes grew heavy, and she stifled a yawn. She decided to take a short break and walk to the far end of the library, where the ancient medical manuscripts were kept. The dim lighting cast long shadows, giving the place an eerie feel. But Talia shrugged it off. As she browsed the shelves, she felt a sudden chill in the air. She rubbed her arms, trying to shake off the cold. Just then, the sound of a book falling to the ground echoed through the silence. Talia jumped, her heart racing. She turned to see a large, dusty tome lying on the floor a few feet away. She hadn't noticed anyone else around, and the sound had come from a dark corner of the library that was rarely visited. Cautiously, she approached the fallen book and bent down to pick it up. As she did, she noticed something strange. The book was open to a page detailing the symptoms and diagnosis of severe depression. She found it odd but thought little of it as she placed the book back on the shelf. As she turned to leave, she heard the faint sound of whispering. She froze, straining to hear the words. The whispers grew louder, though she couldn't discern what they were saying. They seemed to be coming from deeper within the library, drawing her in. Talia's curiosity got the better of her, and she followed the sound, her footsteps echoing softly on the wooden floor. The whispers led her to a secluded study area at the farthest end of the library. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of moonlight streaming through the tall, narrow windows. The air felt colder here, almost frigid. As she stepped into the room, the door behind her creaked shut, and the whispers ceased abruptly, plunging the room into an oppressive silence. Talia's heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the room. Her eyes settled on a small, old-fashioned desk in the corner. She approached it, drawn by an inexplicable force. On the desk was an old, yellowed letter. Gathering every ounce of courage, Talia picked up the letter and began to read. The handwriting was neat yet shaky, and as she read, her heart ached with sorrow. The letter was a suicide note from a student named Claire. Dated back several decades, Claire had been a promising medical student, much like Talia, but the relentless pressure and isolation had driven her to despair. Her final words spoke of unbearable loneliness and the haunting silence of the library, where she had spent her last moments. As Talia finished reading, she felt a cold breeze brush against her cheek. She looked up and saw, to her horror, the ghostly figure of Claire standing by the window. The figure was faint, almost translucent, with long, disheveled hair obscuring its face. It wore a tattered, old-fashioned student uniform. Talia's blood ran cold as the figure slowly turned to face her, revealing hollow, dark eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. Talia knew she couldn't stay in the library any longer. She grabbed her belongings and rushed out, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The cold night air outside was a welcome relief as she made her way back to her dormitory, her mind reeling with the night's events. In the weeks that followed, Talia's determination to succeed remained, but she also made sure to balance her studies with moments of rest and connection with her friends. The haunting encounter had taught her a valuable lesson about the importance of mental well-being and the dangers of isolation. Story 3. Midnight Rituals. In the heart of Pendleton, a quaint town nestled in the rolling hills of New England, stood Pendleton University, a venerable institution with a history that stretched back over a century. Its sprawling campus boasted ivy-covered buildings and expansive lawns that exuded an aura of academic excellence and tradition. James, a dedicated student nearing the end of his sophomore year, found himself grappling with the impending final exams. Determined to excel, he often spent long hours studying late into the night. His roommate, a heavy sleeper, preferred to keep their shared dorm room in peaceful darkness, leaving James with no choice but to seek solitude elsewhere. The university provided a study room within the main facility, a quiet retreat perfect for focused study sessions. One particularly stressful night, as the clock neared midnight, James sat hunched over his textbooks in the study room. The room was eerily silent, the only sound being the soft rustle of pages turning. The pressure of the exams weighed heavily on him, and he felt the walls closing in with each passing minute. The hours ticked by slowly, and by the time the clock struck 3 a.m., James was the only one left in the room. It was then that he heard it. A faint, rhythmic drumming accompanied by an ancient melodic chanting. At first, he thought his tired mind was playing tricks on him. He shook his head and rubbed his eyes, trying to dispel the sound, but the drumming persisted, growing louder and more insistent. The haunting melody was unlike anything he had heard before, resonating deep within him and sending chills down his spine. Confused and slightly unnerved, James glanced at his watch. The luminescent hands confirmed it was indeed 3 a.m. He knew no one would be practicing music at this ungodly hour, especially not with exams looming. The idea of a late-night music rehearsal was absurd, yet the sounds persisted, refusing to be ignored. The chantings grew louder, filling the room with an almost tangible presence. James felt a growing sense of dread. Determined to put an end to the disturbance, he decided to confront the source of the noise. Gathering his courage, he left the study room and followed the haunting sounds through the darkened hallways of the university. The further he ventured, the more intense the drumming and chanting became. It seemed to be emanating from the old wing of the campus, a place students avoided due to its eerie reputation. The wing had been closed off for decades, its decaying structure deemed unsafe. Yet, the sounds beckoned him, pulling him towards its forgotten corridors. As James approached the entrance to the old wing, the air grew colder and an unsettling silence fell over him. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, revealing a darkened passageway lined with cracked plaster and dusty cobwebs. His heart pounded in his chest, but he pressed on, convinced he would find a group of students partying or playing a prank. The haunting melody guided him deeper into the wing, past classrooms frozen in time and forgotten relics of the past. The sound led him to a large, ornate door that marked the entrance to the old auditorium. The drumming was now deafening, the chanting a relentless whisper in his ears. Taking a deep breath, James pushed open the door and stepped into the auditorium. The sight before him was beyond anything he could have imagined. The room was bathed in an ethereal glow, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to dance to the rhythm of the drums. Figures dressed in traditional Native American garments moved gracefully around a central fire. Their faces were painted with vibrant, haunting designs, red and black patterns that seemed to come alive in the flickering light. They wore feathered headdresses and fringed garments adorned with beads and bones, their movements fluid and synchronized with the beat of the drums. The chantings and drumming reverberated through the air, creating an almost hypnotic atmosphere. James stood frozen, unable to look away from the surreal scene. The figures moved with a fluid grace, their movements synchronized with the beat of the drums. It was a ritual, ancient and powerful, performed by spirits long departed from the mortal world. Suddenly, one of the figures turned towards James, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The figure's gaze pierced through him, and he felt an invisible force tugging at his very soul. The figure raised a hand, and with a sharp, chilling whisper, said, "Intruder." Without warning, the figures began to close in on him, their hands reaching out as if to grasp him. James took a step back, his heart racing, and then he saw them, shadows of spears appearing in their hands, ready to strike. He spun around and sprinted back the way he had come, the spectral warriors hot on his heels. The chase through the old wing was a blur of terror. James darted down narrow corridors, vaulted over broken furniture, and pushed through cobwebs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The drumming and chanting pursued him relentlessly, growing louder with each step. He could feel the cold breath of the spirits on his neck, the sharp whispers of their chants urging him to run faster. In a final desperate burst of energy, James saw the faint outline of the exit. He barreled through the heavy wooden doors and out into the cold night air. He dared not look back until he was safely on the main campus. He finally turned around. The old wing stood silent and dark, the haunting sounds gone as if they had never been. From that night on, he avoided the old wing like the plague, choosing to study during daylight hours and never staying out late again. The memory of the spectral dancers and the haunting chantings remained etched in his mind, a chilling reminder of the night he ventured too far into the unknown. That's it for today, guys. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe to Supernatural Secrets, and remember, the real horror isn't always the exams. It's what they bring out in us. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and may the mysteries of the supernatural continue to captivate your imagination. This is Supernatural Secrets signing off.